Ginger Nunes, Gingernunes.
And we'll talk about the eye line.
And yeah, and I'm going to have you just keep your eyes on me because I know it's tempting to talk
Okay.
to everybody, but
Okay.
when we see you in the movie, it'll look like your eyes are moving around. And you don't want that. Trust me.
It'll go right along with me losing track of what I was talking about.
It's okay. We're both going to do that, and it's fine. And
Okay.
that's the thing about digital videos is we can just take lots of time to do what we need to do, and you don't have to worry about it. We'll just go in and edit everything, and it'll be fine. So
Okay.
if you lose track of where you're going, and you say, I have no idea where I was going with that, and we'll just start on a new track.
Okay.
And it'll all be fine.
Okay.
It's very easy. So, and then another thing is I wanted to let you know is when you're talking, I'm going to be really quiet, but I'm listening, but I won't interject or try and, I won't give you a lot of verbal feedback because I don't want to, my voice is going to be cut out of this and all we'll be hearing is your voice. So when you answer, if you could talk in just complete sentences. So if I say, Ginger, how old were you at the time of the flood? You could say, well, I was 14 years old at the time of the flood. So that people are only going to hear what you have to say, and they won't. If you just say 14, they won't know what that's connected to.
Oh, okay.
Does that make
Okay.
sense?
So you're not going to be part of it, like
I'm
they're not
part
going
of
to hear
it.
you
We're
asking
gonna
me
edit
questions.
me out.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
And don't take it personal if she doesn't respond to what you said.
Okay.
Because we need a little bit of a gap between what you said and what the next question is.
Okay.
Yeah, so I'll let a little lull happen, and then I'll ask the next question.
Okay.
But it just feels a little awkward because you're used to conversing with somebody, and somebody would lead
Yeah.
right in with the next question, and so it's just a little pause.
Okay.
So we're just going to start out just letting you, say the things that you want to say right off the bat, and we'll follow up on anything that you feel like from your notes you've missed, or I feel like I've missed from asking you questions. But we know that you and your family had a very close call during the 1964 flood, and we're just going to let you tell your story and take your time telling it.
Okay. Well, when you live on a dairy, there's always a flurry of activity when you've had several days of rain and the river starts to rise, which in 64 it did. Our family, we would always take hourly trips down to the river bar to check the level of the river. We never depended on somebody else or the news reports or whatever to be accurate. We learned from experience that, take that responsibility. So we would go down and mark the fence. We would either put a rock or tie something on the fence and then go down an hour later to see how high it had risen. And that way it would give us an idea of what we needed to do. You start bringing your animals up closer to the barn or whatever, or pinning them up so that, if the water comes over, you're not down there in the water. So, and that was always, it seems like the water always came up at night. And so that ride down to the river bar was always, it was exciting, but and scary at the same time. In 64, we got down there and it was like, we were shocked at how fast it had come up. And so when we went home, there was...
Hello, come on in.
We were early. That's my brother Rich.
Hello, Rich.
How you doing?
Jennifer.
I thought we were going to do this together. Just leave.
No, you can stay. As soon as we're done, we're going to put you in the hot seat. So something to look forward to.
Not like I've never been there before.
Okay.
Why don't you start right at we were shocked on how far it goes up.
Yeah, we were shocked at the level. And so when we came back, the water was coming through the dip, which there's a dip in our lane.
Yeah, I think.
We'll let them settle in.
Yeah.
Oh.
Start over again. Okay.
Okay.
Okay. We went down to the river and we were shocked at how high it had risen. And when we came back, there was water coming through this dip in our lane that when that dip filled, we were always trapped in. And so we were in a flood in 1955 and trapped in there. And so every year after that, my mom had taken us kids out and everybody started making fun of her because here we were, 10 years later and she's still taking us out. So this year she decided not to take us out. And so when we came back, there was water coming through. And so we went in and then we couldn't get back out. And then my dad called C.J. Heinley, who was at the time the civil defense director, I believe, for Humboldt County. And he said, it's too late for us. he said, this river's coming up faster than I have ever seen it. And he said, you need to get everybody out that you can. And so CJ still wanted to figure out a way to get us out. And Dad said, no, you can't get across the dip with boats. He goes, somebody will get killed. And he goes, just get everybody else out. And so we proceeded to move animals and move vehicles. And Mom was cooking and getting things ready and putting a pot of soup on the stove and getting pitchers of water because we knew we would be losing power and everything. And so then we had a transistor radio that my mom was listening to, and I think the news report was out of Sacramento saying that the water was receding. And so she had my aunt and I standing at the door sweeping the water out. She kept saying, it's going down, it's going to start going down, so keep sweeping. And then all of a sudden, the floor warped, and it just bubbled up. And then we had a coffee table that had Christmas decorations on it, and it just flipped over, and everything went into the water. That it just rushed in when the floor warped. And so Mom started. I had a sister who was born with cerebral palsy, and so she couldn't walk. And so Mom was yelling for Dad to get her up. And so then we realized we had to go up into the attic. And so then in our attic, there was just 2 pieces of plywood that was used for storage to put boxes on. I keep forgetting and looking at those guys. Sorry.
It's okay. You've only done it once that I've seen.
So anyway, there was just 2 pieces of plywood that was used to put boxes of Christmas decorations and that type of thing on. So they threw all of that stuff off. The rest of the attic was just the 2x4 runners and sheetrock. And so there were 10 of us that had to sit on those 2 pieces of plywood for 2 nights and 3 days. And it was my mom and dad, my 2 brothers, Tony and Rich, and my sister Tina. I was 14. Tony and Rich were 10 and 8, and Tina was 6. And then my aunt and uncle, John and Lily Nunes, and my cousin Weedy. And we had a hired man from Portugal, Manuel. And so there were the 10 of us up there. And our dogs were downstairs on the mattresses. We'd stacked the furniture up, on everything that we could think of, and just lifted what we could, and, so then we were up there. And the log pond at Pacific Lumber Company had broke loose, and so the logs were coming down. We were right in the pathway of that, and there were logs hitting the house and building up. Before we went up into the attic, Dad and Uncle John and the boys had gone to the barn moving animals and stuff. When they came back, the drift had been building up, hooking onto our front porch. And so they were out there chopping on it, trying to get it loose, because they were worried if it pulled off the porch, just a little bit of damage to the house would cause more of it to break up. So they did that. And during the afternoon, before we went into the attic, there was a horse barn across from our house and a garage. And my uncle had a new car in the horse barn because it was high. And we watched all of that collapse and wash away, along with other, various sheds and, animals and things. And they'd gone over to my aunt's house because we'd actually thought about staying there because it was a 2-story house, but it was older and it was right near this dip. So they decided at the last minute to stay in ours, but went over to her house and moved everything upstairs. And then our house in 1955 sat right on the ground, and the water was just seeping into the bathroom. And so in 58, our house burned to the ground, and they built a new house, and they built it 3 feet higher because they said that was the worst flood that we would ever have, was the one in 55. And that way, if it was 3 feet higher, we would never get water in the house. And so that's what made them decide. They even talked about staying in the barn, the milk barn, or the hay barn up in the haystack. But just because of having the kids and the food in the house and whatnot, we decided to stay there. And so, you're up there and you're hearing the sounds and of the logs hitting the house and the windows breaking. And, sorry.
That's okay if you want to on it.
There was a point where Well, then Dad and Uncle John, they'd cut a hole in the roof. And so they kept looking out, hoping to see someone coming for us. And then at some point, my aunt's house, and they had barns, garage, sheds, chicken house, and all of that washed away that night. And Dad and Uncle John knew it, but Aunt Lily didn't know it. And they didn't want any of us to know it. But then Mom looked out and gasped. And so then Aunt Lily insisted on looking out. And she starts crying and screaming and talking in Portuguese. She says, "Ai Jesus," and she just said it over and over, which I think means, "Oh my God, oh my God." So anyway, we pretty much thought that we would be going next. And so...
It's hard to imagine. Your mom was only 30 at the time, for her to try and keep the family together and keep these kids calmed down.
Yeah.
That must have been really difficult.
Yeah, she's, when I think back on it, she's amazing, I wish she was still here, because I never, until you called, I'd never really started thinking about this that much, But going back and thinking that here's this woman that went through the 55 flood at 20, and then her house burns to the ground with no insurance. And then she has my sister, who had cerebral palsy and had, I don't even know how many surgeries that she had to have over the years. And then now she goes through this 64 flood. And she was just the voice of strength for all of us. Just, kept saying, God would take care of us. Don't worry, God will take care of us. And we're all just, going nuts. And anyway, so then she sent, we were hungry, and she sent Dad down to get something for us to eat. And he came back with a can of fruit cocktail and a nail. And she told him, don't forget the can opener. She said, get some canned food. And so he comes back, and he doesn't have a can opener. And she said, God, Tony, these guys are hungry. I don't know what you're thinking. And he said, he's whispering, but you're on 2 pieces of plywood, so you can't really whisper and keep it from anybody. But I think my brother Rich and my sister and my cousin were all sleeping, so my brother Tony and I heard what was said. And Dad said that the drift had built up against the house, and the wall was pushing in, and he was afraid that if he opened a cupboard or a drawer, that the whole wall would come in. And he said he didn't think we were going to make it. And so then my brother and I, started crying. And once again, Mom's trying to reassure us, saying, no, we're going to be fine. You'll see, we'll be fine. And it was very, very traumatic. And I can't imagine, Dad was 31. Their strength and their courage, to do everything that they had to do. And then Mom's, capability of taking care of all of us and soothing everybody, soothing my aunt and my cousin. And it was amazing.
Do you want to talk about the rescue? Because you were, eventually, they tried to come around once and weren't able to get you, and then maybe talk about that a little bit. Yeah, so
when you try to come from the Ferndale side, the dip, it's just like a whirlpool. It's like looking out at the ocean. It's just waves and swirling. And then there was all the logs and everything. So they ended up coming in from the Fortuna side, and I believe it was the Sheriff's Marine Posse that came in with 2 boats, and it took, I think, a couple of hours for them to work their way across and over to us. So they pulled up to the back of the house, and we heard yelling, and then they brought us down into the water. And my brothers had learned to make logs or flares out of rolling newspapers really tight, and so that was one of the, Mom gave us projects to do, and that was one of the things that we did, and we took all that up into the attic. So during the night, they would light those and then hold them down to see how much higher the water had come. And it was up about the level of the light switches in the house. And then they would drop those down into the water. They'd burn for a while, and, we'd be able to see what was going on. And I don't know if that was a good thing or a bad thing. But so anyway, they brought us down, and we got in the boats. And my aunt was very afraid, did not want to get in the boat. and it took some convincing to get her to do it. And then for some reason, they put the kids and the hired man in a boat, and then the adults got in the other boat. I don't know if they were trying to get rid of us or what, but our boat stalled, and so it was, pretty scary there for a little bit, but they got it going. And then they took us, because of the way the current goes, they were able to take us out that way, the Ferndale side. And so then we got down near the end of our lane, and we got out and waded to Jim Titus's house. And we went in there for a while and got to use the bathroom and wash up a little bit and everything. And then we went down Grizzly Bluff Road farther. There was a dump truck waiting. And so we all got into the back of this dump truck. And we're all just dirty and stinky and wet and just awful. And we stopped we called it the Edeline House. There's a big row of, I think, cypress trees and this great big old 2-story house. And one of those trees had fallen, so that's why the dump truck couldn't come all the way down to get us. And there was water all on the road there. And so we get into the dump truck, and it pulls up to this big old 2-story house. And this lady named Mrs. Tyke Grabber comes out, and she's got on heels and a fur coat and a fox fur with a little fox head clamped onto the fox's tail, a bunch of necklaces.
There's rolling in the mic.
Oh,
Okay.
that's okay. Sorry.
All kinds of necklaces and rings, and she's got on this little hat with a little veil on it. I mean, it's like she put on every good thing that she had, that she wanted to take it with her, and she gets into the back of this dump truck with all of us. And we're just thinking this is so funny. So then the dump truck is taking us back to town, and trying to stay in the center because you don't know where the road is, you don't know what's in the under the water, and there were places where the road was gone; it had washed out, and so you hit these holes where you just drop down in, which was really scary. But anyway, they got us to Coffee Creek School, and there was a school bus there, and we got on the school bus. And the school bus took us into the fairgrounds, and they had cots and food and everything set up there. But we all had friends. The whole family had friends there waiting for us, so we went home with them.
Yeah, they were worried that you might not have made it.
Yeah, and actually that's what my aunt and uncle's other daughter. She got married in September, and so she didn't live here anymore. And she was on the other side of the river watching, I don't know, my cousin said it was a ticker tape. I don't know exactly what she meant by that, but they thought we were gone. And my uncle's brother lived in Willows, and that's what they heard on the news down there, that we were all gone. And so it wasn't the case, though.
And you were saying, too, about when you were rescued, at some point you had to step into the water, and we're happy to feel the ground under your feet.
Yes.
Tell about that.
Yeah. Well, I don't really remember the boat ride, which seems really strange because, I remember looking out at the water and all the drift and how frightening it was, but I don't, and I remember coming down and crawling through the window, but I don't actually remember the boat ride to the end of the lane. I just remember being lifted out and then back into the water, but feeling my feet hit the ground and just like, ground. Still in the water, but I can feel the ground, and what a relief it was. So, yeah. Anyway,
Let's see. Something else it seems like.
one of the other things I remembered, my mom has the patience of a saint, and we're trying, to save as much stuff as we could save. And I had a prom dress. I was a freshman in high school.
Have you put that paper over there?
Oh, I was a freshman in high school, so I had a prom dress. Never had a dress like that in my life. And we're headed to the attic, and I'm like, I started to go down the hall, and Mom's like, "What are you doing?" And I'm like, I want to put my prom dress up. And Mom goes, don't worry about your damn prom dress. She goes, get in the attic. And I'm like, but I don't want it to be ruined. She goes, it won't be ruined. Don't worry about it. Well, it was ruined. It was, the top half was beautiful white and the bottom half was ugly brown.
There was another story you told me about your uncle when people said, would you go back and live there? And would you go back and do the same sort of work?
Oh yeah, they wanted to, he was interviewed and they wanted to know what he would do now. And he just was kind of dumbfounded. He goes, well, what do you mean? I'll just go back there. And they go, you go back after all of this? He goes, well, people die in their sleep and they don't quit sleeping. And I'm like, only you would have thought to have said that, Uncle John.
I love that story.
Yeah. And then at one point, we couldn't move around in the attic because of the worry of falling through the sheetrock. And at one point, Uncle John tripped and he fell and he went through the sheetrock. He didn't fall all the way down, but he hit his face on one of the 2x4s and he split it open and his eyeball was all bulging out. And here you are, you're in the attic. You have no alcohol, no bandages, no nothing, and you just have to tough it out. And I just remember how scary looking he was, the blood and the bulging eyeball and everything.
And he was able to keep his sight.
Yes, yeah, he recovered just fine from it. But yeah.
It's scary at the time,
Yeah. Yeah.
And people losing, your family lost, a lot of their ability to work and make money and, their homes and everything. Talk about cleaning up after the flood, too.
Cleaning up, the people whose house we went and stayed at, Tony and Marguerite Martin, and neighbors and friends came out and helped us clear drift and shovel the house out. There was a Mennonite group that came and helped us clean out the house. It took months and months and months for the house to be cleaned out, but it's just amazing, the people that came to our aid. And then when our house burned and the other floods, places like Nielsen Company and Valley Grocery and Rings Pharmacy, Dr. Crane, we couldn't pay our bills because we didn't have the money, and it was fine. They just carried us. As long as they needed to carry us, they carried us through every major event that we had to go through, and there were quite a few. And there was never, you didn't get a letter saying, if you don't pay this in 30 days, you're going to get interest or get your account closed. They just carried Mom and Dad. And, eventually we were able to pay them back. And I can't imagine living anywhere else if you have to go through a traumatic experience. They just carried us.
And where did you live after the flood till your home was ready to move into?
Well, we lived in a trailer actually at the fairgrounds after we stayed with friends for quite a while, and then I don't remember who brought the trailers in, but there were quite a few people that moved into those, and we lived at the fairgrounds during the fair even, which was quite fun. We'd always lived out in the middle of a field, and we never got to go to town much or anything, so here we were in town at the fairgrounds, which was fun. 4 people, though, in a single-wide trailer, it was a little crowded. And then we rented a house in Ferndale for a while. And then actually, Mom and Dad decided not to go back out to the ranch. They lived in town, and Dad got a job at the mill for a few years. And then he made the decision to go back out, I think in 1970 or something like that.
Back to the same home?
Yeah. Yeah.
By then, what sort of shape did you have it back into?
It was back in great shape, yeah. And they lived there for, I think, until in the 80s, and then my brother moved into it, and my mom and dad moved into Ferndale, took over the Fern Motel, and lived in town. My mom was thrilled. She had always hated living at the ranch, so she was thrilled to move to town. So,
good.
Yeah.
Anything else that we haven't? You've been such a great interviewee. imagine there's anything. You answered all the questions I had, and I didn't have to ask them. How's that possible? You're the only person who's done that so far.
Well, then we.
Yeah, let's do some follow-up questions. These guys usually, while I'm talking, they're thinking of things that
Okay.
I wish I'd asked, but we're going to have you continue to look as if I'm asking the question.
Okay.
Well, I was just wondering, Jenny, I mean, that's a long time to be spending in that attic with that many people.
Yes.
What about the passage of time and what was going through your minds? And
Well, Mom would try and get us to sing and, play games or whatever. And, I don't really remember. It just seems like when I think back on it, that's an incredible amount of time to be spending in such a small space on 2 pieces of plywood. But maybe my brother would remember more, but I don't really remember.
what was that your darkest moment when your father gave that report of what the wall was doing, and you two were really, really scared at that point?
Well, that, and then when we realized my aunt's house was gone, that was really hard. I mean, because she was screaming and it was very traumatic because we lived just across the field from each other forever, so she had lots of family get-togethers there and lots of meals and lots of fun memories and times. And so then to realize that everything washed away, it's just, it was hard. And to think that, well, that washed away, so I guess we might be next. It was just really hard.
Yeah, and the thing too was, I mean, I'm thinking about when I was a kid and it was Christmas time, and then to have this in the middle of this time when you're like preparing for this holiday, how did that kind of play out for you? Having Christmas around the same time.
I all I remember actually is the stuff that was on that coffee table. That it was stuff I had learned to make in Girl Scouts. It was a net Christmas tree and candles, and then that coffee table tipped over and the Christmas stuff was in the water. I don't really remember the Christmas tree or Christmas presents. I don't know. My brothers, you asked about a picture of if it was us in a picture with some presents, and my brother remembers getting presents up at the fairgrounds, and I don't remember presents. I
think it was I found another note on my list of notes, and I have a feeling that was the one that I had thought was you guys, and it was the Gomes family.
Oh, okay.
And there were a picture of it was a boy and a girl, and Christmas presents outside, and it was kind of muddy. So I
Okay.
in my head been talking to you and thought that picture was you, but I think it was them.
Okay.
I'm pretty sure it was a different picture.
Yeah.
And let's see. Any other questions, you guys?
Did you want to mention the wallet disappearing?
Oh yeah.
Thanks.
So, Dad and Uncle John had gone over to Uncle John's house to move all the furniture upstairs, and Uncle John had a few $1,000s in his wallet to pay. The hired man was going to be going back to Portugal soon, in a few days, and so Uncle John had this money to pay him cash before he left. So, as an afterthought, after they moved everything upstairs, he thought he should put the wallet up there so it wouldn't get lost while they were out doing other things. And so then when his house went, the wallet went with it, and the cash was lost. But also he had, everything went. So a year or so ago, someone posted on Facebook, the museum's Facebook site, that his grandfather had found cans of coins. And so I've always thought that because Aunt Lily and Uncle John were always saving coins, and I've always thought those were probably from Aunt Lily and Uncle John's house. Yeah, different people have commented on seeing the house go floating by and stuff, and then so.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. That is intense. Thank you so
Yeah.
much for telling your story. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, hopefully my brother can add more stuff that I can't remember.
We'll get him over here on the hot seat.